This is You're Probably Right. Entertainment first, everything else is just bonus. Opinions, all ours. Sometimes backed by research, but never the final word. There are always exceptions, so take it with a grain of salt and a slight dusting of chili powder. If something in this episode resonates with you or you want to reach out directly, you can email the show at yprpodcast@gmail.com. You can also find the podcast on Facebook. Just search You're Probably Right podcast and the page should come up. And if you are listening somewhere other than Spotify, you can find the show there as well. Just search You're Probably Right and follow the podcast so new episodes show up automatically. All right, let's get into it.
Hey, yo, what's up? This is MCM and you're listening to You're Probably Right podcast. I'm happy that you're here. Why am I happy that you're here? Basically, because I think I finally got to what I needed to get to. And you're here to witness whenever you finally got here. Anyhow, I'm going to get right into it. Just remember that all my episodes, including this one, of course, are for entertainment purposes only. Okay. And I'm going to start right away because this is a long one. And feel free to cut off anytime you want, but come back, please, because some good information. And I'm going to say just off the cuff that this episode is for people who are who they are and who are satisfied with who they are in a sense. Not to say that you don't need to alter some of your behaviors, some of your routines, some of the things that you allow to happen and some of the things that you do. But at the same time, maybe you don't want to be the stoic man, the stoic woman. Maybe you don't want to be void of all of your emotions and feelings when going into something that you want to put your whole life into. And I think about the movie, what's it called? It's called The Hope Gap. And to tell you the truth, I haven't watched the whole movie yet. But the basics of the movie is you have two people who are married. And you have a man who has shut down for a long, if he ever even was open at all. And he finally came to realize that what he was in wasn't real. He wasn't real. And at times, maybe his wife was too real and she was trying to draw his realness out. And finally, when he came out, she didn't like it. Now, I can't say they don't end up back together, but maybe you saw the movie, so you know at this point. But from that lens, I think, anyhow, this episode is for people who like who they are, but realize that maybe some things that they have put up with, some things that they have taken part in weren't exactly right or are not exactly right. And maybe you just need to come to terms and take stock of everything that has happened, everything that's transpired so far. And maybe there's a way that you can take a left at Albuquerque instead of a right, or heading on straight through the intersection. You know what I mean? If you don't, you will in a second. So I'm going to get right into it. Let me start by saying this isn't an episode about bitterness. And it's not an episode about blaming anyone either. It's about something far more uncomfortable than that. It's about the moment you realize you were acting in good faith while someone else was acting in convenience. About the kind of connection that felt real enough to rearrange your sleep, your money, your patience, your self-respect, but somehow never real enough for the other person to show up when it counted. And if you've ever sat alone after a relationship ended up horrible for you and thought, I don't even know what to call what just happened to me, or I don't know what to call what I just took part in. Then you already know exactly where this conversation is going. Because here, the thing that most don't tell you while you're inside of it. The most damaging relationships don't look dramatic, like, TV or like a reality show. They don't look abusive. They don't look chaotic, like one of those cop videos on YouTube where everything goes from 0 to 100, as Drake would say, real quick, real quick. They actually look reasonable. They look like timing issues on the surface. They look like hesitation. Guys, why I'm halting? You're going to find out in 1 second. This thing usually catches me off guard. So I'm just going to listen to this for a sec.
If this sounds familiar, follow the show so this kind of thinking stays close.
That thing usually catches me off guard. It's just in the track. So anyhow, sorry about that. Okay. They look like someone who's been through a lot and just need understanding. And slowly, without noticing it's happening, you become the patient one, the supportive one, the flexible one, the one who can wait. Until one day you wake up and realize you've been carrying the emotional weight of two people, while the other person has been carrying none of the responsibility, none of the weight. What makes this hard to talk about is that when you try to explain it to people, it sounds very small. It sounds petty. It sounds like you should just move on. But your body knows better. Your mind keeps replaying conversations. Maybe you look through your cell phone or whatever you're looking through and looking at old conversations and pictures and voice notes, listening to them maybe, or videos that you've been sent, or music that you've been sent to explain feelings, or maybe stuff that you've sent, probably in the other direction. Moments mixed with signals that you still don't understand, gifts that didn't match effort, affection that never turned into commitment. You weren't addicted to the person. You were trapped in ambiguity. You weren't asking for too much. You were asking the wrong person to meet you where they never intended to stand in the first place. You were fooling yourself. So this episode is for people who were generous without being reckless, or maybe you were. Loyal without being foolish, or maybe you were. Patient without being blind, maybe you were. It's for the people who stayed longer than they should have because they believed character still mattered. We're going to talk about why it felt real to you, why it didn't mean the same thing to them, and why that realization hurts in a way that takes a long time to put into words. And if you're still in it, this might help you see it clearly. If you're out of it, This might finally explain why it messed with your head in the way that it did. Either way, you're not crazy and you're not alone. I have no issue with helping other people out, especially when I've seen some of these things myself over my lifetime. And there was nobody there to explain exactly what was happening, what was going on, or what I went through. There's nobody there to explain and help me to figure out things so I wouldn't go through it again and again and again and again and again. Most people don't enter this kind of relationship thinking they're about to lose their footing. They don't wake up one morning saying, I'm going to give more than I receive, doubt my own perception, and slowly shrink my expectations until I don't recognize myself anymore. That's not how it begins. It begins quietly, reasonably, almost logically. It begins with connection that feels real enough to trust but unstable enough to work harder for. If you're listening to this, there's a good chance you didn't think of yourself as desperate, reckless, or naive when it started. You probably thought of yourself as patient, loving, understanding, loyal, maybe even principled. Maybe you grew up in a Christian home and maybe because, you believe in the Word of God and, in the Bible, and you believe in sacrifice, and, Jesus came to die for our sins, and he came to literally die for our sins. And greater love hath no man than he that laid down his life for a friend. So therefore, you took that as you should become somebody's carpet. You took that as maybe you need to become somebody's jacket thrown over a puddle so they can walk over. Maybe it made you spineless because you didn't check out what else you're supposed to do and what else you should be expecting from others. You just expected everything of yourself. And at times you probably weren't able to fulfill the things that you thought you were supposed to fulfill. So you even faltered in some ways and ruined relationships yourself. You told yourself that love doesn't always look the same in the beginning and the consistency will somehow grow over time. And at first, nothing felt obviously wrong. There are moments of closeness, maybe intimacy, maybe laughter, maybe vulnerability that felt intimate. Even if it didn't last, you were told stories, you were welcomed into somebody else's narrative of all the things that had happened to them, and you figured, well, if they trust me with their life story and the things that have hurt them, then maybe they're drawing me in and I'm a part of them and I'll be a part of their life for a long time to come. Given weight, given burden, there was enough warmth to justify staying and enough uncertainty to explain away your discomfort. You didn't feel chosen. You knew that. But you didn't feel rejected either, so you thought that fighting to be chosen would be something that you could do and pull off. You felt suspended, like something was forming, just slowly. Like you were being asked to implicitly wait. That waiting is where the damage actually began. Because while you were waiting, you were also giving. You were listening, you were supporting, encouraging, showing up emotionally, maybe even financially, maybe practically. You were investing in ways that felt natural to you because that's how you were raised or how you learned to love. You thought that love is something that you fight for. Love is something that you earn. Although Jesus gave love freely. Or how you learned to be decent in a relationship. You weren't keeping score. You weren't calculating percentages, although now you think about all that you gave. You were acting in good faith. But maybe you were just acting in good faith in what you did and what you gave, instead of faith in the right place. And that's faith in God. What you couldn't see yet was the relationship had already split into two different experiences, happening at the same time, going in different directions. On your side, there was hope, effort, and increasing attachment. On the other side, there was access without obligation. You were able to do and be and act in ways that you generally don't get to do or be or have so quickly. But somehow this adrenaline, epinephrine hit of closeness sucked you in closer and closer as they moved away, farther and farther away. That split is almost impossible to recognize while you're still inside, because nothing is overtly cruel. There is no clear betrayal at first, no obvious villain, just a slow erosion of clarity and a growing sense that you're doing more emotional work than you can quite explain or afford. This is where people start blaming themselves. You ask yourself if you're reading too much into things, if you're being impatient, if you're projecting, if your expectations are unrealistic. You tell yourself that the other person is going through a lot, that life is hard, that nobody owes anyone anything. You internalize the idea that wanting clarity might be controlling, that wanting reciprocity might be needy. At least that's what you hear from your friend groups and your girls or your boys. That wanting to feel considered might be asking for too much. You're too emotional. Meanwhile, something very specific is happening to your nervous system. Human attachment relies on predictability, not perfection, predictability. When warmth and withdrawal alternate without explanation, your system doesn't relax, it stays alert, waiting for the next thing. It keeps scanning, it keeps replaying conversations, and hey, now that we have cell phones, we can go over those conversations over and over and over again. We can replay messages, we can look at pictures over and over, we can play songs over and over again. We can send messages that you had from others to others, and they can give you their spin on it. You can send it to somebody else and they can give their spin on it. Now you can even input it into AI, and AI can give you a spin on it. It keeps trying to locate the moment where things shifted, or the sentence you should have said differently, or the behaviors that might finally tip the scale. The mental loop, or that mental loop, is not obsession. It's unresolved signal processing. Your mind is trying to make sense of a relationship that offers emotional cues without structural commitment. It's like being handed pieces of a map that never quite connect, like a puzzle, and being told the problem is that you're not looking hard enough. Over time, this uncertainty becomes normalized. You stop asking direct questions. You stop bringing things up when they bother you because every time you've done it before, the subject has changed or you're met with some sort of a okey doke, as some would say. You're like, look over here. Meanwhile, stuff's happening over there. By the time you look back over here, you forget what the point was at that time. And then you realize that you just want to have a nice evening. So you let it go. You tell yourself that if you're just a little more understanding, a little less intense, a little more flexible, things will just settle. You start negotiating with yourself before you ever speak to the other person. You work it out within yourself when you shouldn't be. That's the point where people lose their center. When you start behaving like two people, you split. Not because they're weak, but because the relationship is teaching them quietly and consistently that their needs are inconvenient and their discomfort is something to manage privately. The bond trains you to self-abandon while calling it maturity. And here's the part that sometimes we don't really realize until much later. The pain you feel in this dynamic isn't just about loss of rejection, it's about moral confusion. You've been always willing to kind of lay your chin out for a slap because you believe in turning the other cheek. You're acting according to one of those set rules: generosity, honesty, proportional care, while the other person is operating under a total different set of rules entirely. They may not announce it, they may not even consciously articulate it, but the rules are different. You ever been in a fight before? And or maybe you haven't, or have you seen one where you can tell that one person is fighting with rules, like let's just say it's a boxing match and you can only use the two hands, right? That's it. That's in boxing. But when nobody else is looking, the other person is willing to bite you, scratch you, poke your eye out, kick you, knee you, and you're there with two hands up. Can you win that fight? You believe that care creates responsibility. They believe that willingness to give grants permission to receive. Those two beliefs cannot coexist without harm. You're going to get hurt. When the relationship finally ends or fades or is cut off, people don't just grieve the person. They grieve the meaning they assign to the experience. The longer it lasted, the worse it feels. They grieve the effort they gave under the assumption that it actually mattered. They grieve the version of themselves that believed patience would be rewarded with clarity. That's why people say things like, I don't know how I let this happen, or I'll never allow this again, or I feel stupid even talking about it. What they're really saying is, the rules I lived by didn't protect me here, and I don't know how to reconcile that. They believe that if you do good, good will happen to you. They believed in a hope of karma, maybe. What goes around comes around. Well, let's check this out. See, we're not here to demonize. We're not here to excuse, not to flatten everything into pop psychology slogans, but to name clearly, without flinching, what this dynamic actually is, how it operates, who it selects, who it selects for, and why it causes such deep and lasting confusion in people who otherwise function well in life. You're not generally a basket case. You don't generally ruminate over situations like this, but somehow you got caught up. You're genuine. You're trusting. You're loving. You're hopeful. You seek connection. You just want to be loved. But before we try to diagnose anything, before we talk about attachment styles or culture or ethics, we have to start here with lived experience, because if you don't feel seen in the opening, none of the explanations will even land. If this sounds familiar, it's not because you're broken. It's because you were playing a serious game with someone who wasn't bound by the same rules as I just explained to you. And now you're going to name those rules. When people describe this kind of relationship while they're still in it, they almost always frame it in the same way. They say things like, "We have something, it's just complicated," or "She's not ready right now," or "He's not ready right now, but the connection is real," or "The timing is off, but the feelings are there," or "They've been hurt before, so they move slowly," or "We're not labeling it." Oh yeah, you like that one, don't you? "But we're clearly more than friends." Clearly. Those explanations feel reasonable. You can explain things away with those because they're built out of familiar cultural language. They sound mature. They sound patient. They sound emotionally intelligent. And most importantly, they allow you to stay without having to confront the possibility that you're participating in something fundamentally one-sided. What you think is happening is delayed relationship. You believe you're early, not excluded. You believe you're building something, not maintaining something that's already reached its ceiling. You believe that if you continue showing up with care and consistency, the other person will eventually meet you up there. What is actually happening is actually very different. You see, what is actually happening is that the relationship has already been defined by the other person. Shocker, huh? Just not disclosed to you fully. The ambiguity you experienced is not mutual uncertainty. It's an asymmetric certainty. On your side, there is questioning. On their side, there is management. This is one of the hardest things for people to accept because it feels insulting to their intelligence. But clarity is not withheld because it doesn't exist. It's withheld because it would reduce access. When someone says they don't know what they want, you've heard this before, but consistently knows what they don't want, that's not confusion. When someone says they're unsure, but it's very but is very sure about keeping options open, that's not being lost. When someone says they're overwhelmed, but continues to accept various types of support without setting boundaries, that's not paralysis, y'all. That's decision making with plausible deniability. People love to say that, huh? Plausible deniability. The illusion persists because the other person continues to offer signals without actual structure. They may flirt, they may touch, they may share personal stories, they may cry with you, they may sleep with you even. They may act jealous at times. Ooh. They may talk about the future in vague ways. They may tell you that you matter, that you're special, that you're a very nice person, a very good girl, a very nice man, gentleman even, that they feel safe with you. That should the hook in the side of your mouth like a fish. None of those things on their own constitute commitment. Structure is what actually matters. Structure is planning. Structure is integration. Have you met their mom? I'm just saying. Structure is consistency. Structure is accountability. Structure is what happens when desire creates responsibility. In this dynamic, structure never arrives. Instead, what you get is proximity, access, just enough to keep the connection alive, but not enough to stabilize it, not enough to make you feel comfortable. The middle space is not accidental. It is the optimal position for someone who wants emotional supply without constraint. From the inside, it feels like you're falling, or actually, it feels like you're failing some invisible test. You keep thinking, if I just say the right thing, right? If I just back off a bit, if I just show more patience, if I just give a little more, if I just stop bringing things up, then maybe they'll relax and move closer. You assume the distance is a response to pressure. So you remove the pressure. Let's just flow. Let's just be. Let's just ride the subway around the city and see where it takes us. It's on tracks. You know where it's taking you. It's like jumping on a treadmill. Lots of energy, lots of time, but you go nowhere. You always get off where you got on. But the distance was never about pressure. It was about preference. This is where the mind starts doing something dangerous. It starts filling in gaps. You begin explaining the other person's behavior for them. You tell yourself stories about their past, their trauma, their stress, their finances, maybe their family, maybe they have kids, their exes. You give meaning where none has been offered explicitly, or maybe they explained a bunch of things and you kind of turned a blind eye because you just wanted to be with them. Realizing that you closed your eyes after they hit you in the face the first time, and I'm not talking physically. You just assumed that if you closed your eyes, you weren't going to get hit again. That meaning keeps you invested, but it also keeps you quiet. Notice what isn't happening. They're not asking you what you need. They're not checking how you're coping with this uncertainty. They're not adjusting their behavior to reduce your confusion. They're not saying, I see this is hurting you, so we need to change something. Instead, when the subject comes up, comes close to clarity, the conversation shifts, it drifts, it dissolves into life stories, exhaustion, humor, or silence. Change the subject. You walk away feeling like you brought something heavy into a space that was supposed to stay light. That feeling is data. In a healthy dynamic, clarity brings relief, even if it brings pain. In an unhealthy one, clarity is treated as a threat. Here's the part that people usually resist the most. If someone truly cared about you, even without being able to offer a relationship, they would not allow you to remain confused about your standing. They would not accept escalating investment, gifts, while remaining emotionally non-committal if they loved you. They would not let you suffer quietly just to preserve their comfort. They wouldn't treat you like a bank account. They wouldn't treat you like a mattress. So what you are actually in is not a relationship waiting to begin. You are in a holding pattern, a space where your presence is valued, but your needs are deferred indefinitely. A space where your giving is normalized and your asking is subtly discouraged. Well, go if you want to go. It's your choice. I'm just not ready to say what I want to do. But you don't leave. Or didn't. And then maybe you had no choice, who knows? And the longer you stay, the harder it becomes to leave. Because now you're not just leaving the person, you're leaving the story you've been telling yourself about what this was supposed to be in the first place and what it was becoming. And if you leave, then you have to kind of admit that you were fooling yourself, that you abandon yourself, that you're off center, you're not as balanced as you supposed. That's why people feel embarrassed afterwards. That's why they minimize it when talking to friends. That's why they say things like, it wasn't really a relationship, but it still hurts. The pain doesn't match the label. And that mismatch makes people doubt themselves. But the pain makes sense once you understand the reality. You weren't confused because nothing was happening. You weren't confused because, well, you weren't confused. You were fooling yourself. You were confused because something was happening, just not in your favor. One of the most corrosive lies people tell themselves after this kind of experience is that they should have known better. That if they were stronger, sharper, more guarded, had more walls up, more doors, or less emotional, they would have seen this coming. That lie adds shame to injury, and it misses the real mechanism entirely. This dynamic does not catch careless people. It catches I would say conscientious people. It catches people who were raised to believe that commitment is proven, through action, right? You work for that love, not talk. People who learn that showing up matters more than grand gestures. People who associate love with responsibility, patience, and endurance. People who don't flinch at discomfort because they've already survived worse. Yeah, there is some damage there. People who don't run at the first sign of problems, ambiguity, because they believe depth takes time. So what do? Well, they're selfless. Maybe you do everything in the relationship. Maybe you cook every meal. Maybe you do this, that, and the other for them, for both of you. In other words, it catches people with a functional moral compass. The hook works because it exploits traits that are normally adaptive. Empathy, loyalty, emotional tolerance, the capacity to delay gratification, the ability to hold complexity without panicking. These are not flaws, they are strengths. But in this specific relational environment, they become liabilities because you care too much. You desire too much. You hope beyond hope. The first mechanism at work is intermittent reinforcement. Intermittent reinforcement is what happens when reward arrives unpredictably. Yeah, like, woo. Not always, not consistently, but just often enough to keep you engaged. Maybe you were. Pardon the pun. The reward might be affection, sex, validation, attention, vulnerability, or even proximity. The key is that it's meaningful to you and it's never guaranteed. So it's like an adrenaline rush here and there, a little hit. Your nervous system responds to this pattern by increasing effort because you're trying to get there again, trying to get that high. not decreasing it. You don't pull away, you lean in. You try harder. You become more attentive, more giving, more patient, more accommodating, more invested. That is not personality defected, or it's not a personality defect or defect. Sorry. That is how human brains are wired to respond to uncertainty with, these mixed rewards. This is the same mechanism that keeps people glued to slot machines. Every once in a while, get a little taste. Not because they're stupid, although you feel stupid, but because unpredictability paired with payoffs override rational calculation. Thinking with your head, thinking with your heart, and some of you are thinking with other things. The second mechanism is moral framing. From early on, the dynamic is framed as delicate. You're encouraged, implicitly or explicitly, I should say. implicitly, yeah. To be careful, right? To not push. Don't pressure. Ease upon the pressure. Don't demand. You're told directly or indirectly that the other person has been hurt. They've been overwhelmed. They've been abused. They've been used. Or constrained by life's problems. Their limitations are the foreground. And yours, you know where they are. They're way back there. So you neglect yourself, and they help you. This creates an internal bind. You know what all their problems are, all the dynamics that are hitting them in this way and that way, and all the problems that are facing them. If you speak up, you risk being unfair. If you stay quiet, you feel unseen. So you compromise with yourself instead. You decide to wait. You decide to be understanding. You decide to absorb this discomfort privately because you don't want to be the kind of person who adds stress to someone who is already struggling with stress. That is how generosity gets repurposed into self-erasure. The third mechanism is incremental escalation. Like that? You didn't give everything at once, did you? It happened slowly. A little more here and there. A little more there. A little more emotional availability. Maybe a little bit of money over here. A little bit of patience. Each step felt reasonable in isolation. There was never a moment where you thought, this is wildly disproportionate. The imbalance only becomes obvious in retrospect when you look back. And the scales don't balance. The effort doesn't even balance. When you finally stop and look at the total picture, That's important because people often imagine exploitation as something obvious, right? Like what they used to do, the Africans, and take videos of these people neck and running through Africa. back in the day, right? It's supposed to be something dramatic, we were told. Something that triggers alarm bells immediately. But this kind of dynamic works precisely because it never spikes high enough to provoke a fight or flight. Maybe you fought it at the beginning, then you kind of let it just it stays just under the threshold where you feel justified in leaving. You probably even bounced the idea off a few people, but you didn't really give them the whole picture. You just told them little pieces, so it didn't sound like anything. You didn't tell them everything. You sought advice from people who didn't know the whole picture. And their advice usually sucked not because they're an idiot, not because they don't know what they're saying, but because you didn't give them the whole picture. You understand? You couldn't tell them that this, that, and the other happened, or how it happened, or where it happened, because if you told them those things, they'd be like, "Are you crazy?" So you told them this, but you didn't tell them that. So how can they help you? How can they help you even if they're a balanced, reasonable person? A balanced, reasonable person cannot help you figure things out if you don't give them the whole picture, if you're not honest. I mean, you're lying to yourself. You're obviously lying to them as well, right? You just wanted it to work. And the fourth is hope anchoring. Hope doesn't come from promises here. It comes from ambiguity, from the idea that something is possible, just not yet. From moments that feel meaningful but aren't followed through. From statements that sound intimate but aren't operationalized. From closeness that appears just often enough to keep you, future minded or keep your hopes up. Hope becomes the currency you're trading against present pain. I can take it. I can take a little more pain. You tell yourself, if I can just get through this uncertain phase, it will make sense later. It'll be worth it in the end. You imagine a version of the relationship that hasn't actually been offered. You're fooling yourself again, but hasn't been explicitly denied either. They didn't say no. Didn't say yes either, though. That imagined future keeps you emotionally invested, even when the present isn't meeting your needs. And the fifth mechanism is identity entanglement. Over time, being the patient one, the understanding one, the supportive one becomes part of how you see yourself in the relationship. Leaving doesn't just feel like losing them. It feels like betraying who you were, who you're trying to be. It feels like abandoning your values. It feels like giving up before the work is actually done. That's why walking away feels heavier than staying, even when staying is so painful. The sixth mechanism is comparison distortion. You're often subtly reminded that the other person, or maybe you're subtly reminded every now and then that other people want that person too. Their social value. Maybe other men or other women. They have other options, other sources of validation. This is sometimes framed as honesty, but it is psychological. It's an effect that is very specific. It lowers your perceived leverage while increasing your emotional urgency because you don't want somebody else to take them away. They have value, that good old value, right? Maybe they're good looking. Maybe they have a good paying job. Maybe they have lots of assets. You start to feel replaceable, which makes you work harder, of course, to be chosen, to tie them down. So why many people get pregnant. Many people get locked in and trapped because they don't know what else to do. The person doesn't know what else to do, but, maybe a baby will keep us together. At the same time, you're positioned as the stable one, the reliable one, the one who understands them in ways that others don't. That combination is toxic. You're made to feel both special and disposable at the same time, which keeps you locked in a constant state of proving yourself and proving your value. None of this requires conscious malice to function, but once it's recognized and allowed to continue, it becomes ethically compromised and it becomes your normal. The final mechanism is self-doubt induction. Because nothing is overtly cruel. You start questioning your interpretation of everything. You minimize your own discomfort. You second guess your reactions. You tell yourself that if it really were that bad, because nothing is overtly cruel, you start to question your interpretation. You minimize your own discomfort. You second guess your reactions. You tell yourself that if it really were that bad, it would be clearer. You distrust your own judgment, even as your body is telling you something is wrong. And again, nobody knows the whole story, so there's no point in telling piece over here and piece over there of the same situation. The only way anybody can get a good look at what actually is happening or what happened is for them to all huddle together and say, oh, I didn't know that. Oh, I didn't know that. Oh, this happened. This happened. Oh, now we know. Listen, that erosion of self-trust is not a side effect. It is the cost of staying in a system where signals and structure don't align. By the time the relationship ends or collapses or is withdrawn, you're left not just grieving the person, but rebuilding your confidence in your own perception. That's why people say, I don't trust myself anymore. Or, I don't know how to stay or how I stayed that long. The answer is not that you were weak. The answer is that the system was designed to reward your strengths while slowly undermining your boundaries, if you had any. And this is the part that most people are afraid of naming, honestly, because it forces a moral decision instead of a psychological one. Up to this point, it is still possible to explain everything through fear, trauma, attachment style, overwhelm, bad timing, or emotional immaturity. All of those explanations feel compassionate. They allow everyone to stay, sympathetic. They allow the story to remain sad instead of sharp. But there is a point in this dynamic where explanation stops being enough. I don't know why I'm whistling like that. Sorry, guys. There is a line. And one that, well, and that once that line is basically crossed, what is happening is no longer just avoidance. That line is knowledge. Avoidance is about discomfort with closeness. Exploitation begins when someone knows that another person is attached, knows the situation that is causing harm, and continues to accept benefits without changing behavior. There's purpose behind it. They're not oblivious, even if they are avoidant. They're not oblivious. They see your anguish, they see their pain, but they also see your function and what you're adding to their life, so they don't want to let you go. Not because they're necessarily trying to hurt you, but because they need you, right? Maybe they're drowning without you. Maybe you were keeping them from having to commit to someone that's maybe using them. So maybe you were supplementing something so that they could be free from committing to you, free from being maybe used by other people. Maybe you thought maybe if you pull away and cut things off, that they would see your worth. But they don't. And you're usually sucked right back in by your own desire, by your own hope. Turning a blind eye, maybe. Maybe you've done that a few times. It becomes a choice. This is where intent gets overvalued in popular conversations, and behaviors gets undervalued. People say things like, they didn't mean to hurt me, or they were just struggling, or they weren't doing it on purpose. But intent only matters once. Behavior that repeats after awareness is no longer innocent, regardless of what someone tells themselves about their motives. You don't have to wake up intending to harm someone to cause harm. You just have to keep choosing yourself while letting someone else pay the cost. You just have to let it happen. The clearest marker that this line is being crossed is what happens after you express your feelings clearly. Yeah. Maybe you've had enough. So you say what the problem is. And what happens after? Before that moment, ambiguity can be mutual. After that moment, it can't. When you say, "This is hurting me," or "I'm confused about where I stand," or "I'm more invested than you are," the moral landscape changes. From that point on, the other person has information. If they didn't know before, they know now. They know that your nervous system is engaged, that your attachment is activated, and that the dynamic is not neutral for you. You care. At that point, an ethical response requires one of three things. And what are those three things, you're wondering? You know, they either end it cleanly because they're not choosing you, or reducing what they accept from you, or ending anything at all that you give them, whatever that is, or changing their behavior to match your level of investment. And I'm not talking about breadcrumbs, and I'm not talking about a little morsel, a little something, something. I'm not talking about that. Anything else is avoidance of responsibility, because the picture is clear. Even if they tried to keep you in ambiguity, they know and they see now whether they were innocent before. They're not now. They are an active participant in the destruction of you and your emotions and your feelings and other things possibly. What you described instead was deflection. Framing, silence, and self-focused storytelling. You were given explanations, not protection. You were given philosophy, not clarity. You were given sympathy for their struggles, not concern for your pain. And that matters. There is a difference between saying, "I don't know how to love you," and saying, "Therefore, I need to stop letting you love me." One is a confession, and the other is an ethical act. Only one of them reduces harm. When someone continues to receive types of labor from you, maybe labor, money, loyalty, sexual access, or validation, after acknowledging that they cannot reciprocate what you want, maybe you don't even want all those things, but they're reciprocating nothing. They are no longer confused. They are consenting to an imbalance. They're using you. And at this point, they're well aware. An imbalance, once recognized, creates obligation. This is where people push back and say, "Nobody owes anybody anything," right? That phrase sounds so modern, It sounds clean. It sounds empowering. But it falls into relational terms, I guess. People owe each other ethical conduct once they enter each other's emotional lives, I believe. You don't owe someone a relationship, though. You don't owe them honesty, or sorry, you do you do owe them honesty that allows them to protect themselves. You know what I mean? You don't you don't owe someone exclusivity. Like you can't just like right? You do owe them clarity if you are benefiting from their attachment. So if somebody wants someone, they make that clear. You owe it to the person to either say, yes, let's go ahead, or we're finished. Not hang out and let's see what happens when you know they have no clue and no idea not idea. They have no intention, sorry, with you. You don't owe someone a future. You do owe them the dignity of informed consent in the present so they can make an informed decision. Keeping someone cloudy when you can show them a real picture is not innocence. I don't know what I want to do. Come on. Consent is not just sexual. It is emotional, and consent without information is not consent at all. Another marker that exploitation has entered the picture is asymmetric sacrifice. When one person is giving in ways that cost them time, money, emotional energy, opportunity for other things, for other people, for other relationships, while the other person's life remains largely unchanged, the system is not reciprocal. When that sacrifice is allowed, you hear that? When this is allowed by the other person to continue without correction, the imbalance becomes structural. Yeah, they're building something, all right, and it's on your back. And they know they're doing it at this point. This is why small gifts, partial gestures, the symbolic returns matter so much. They are not kindness. They are plausible deniability. They allow the person to tell themselves and others that they are not taking without giving, even though the proportions tell a different story. I know you know what I'm saying. If I give you a car, you don't have money to give me a car, but you give me a pair of socks, a sweater. It's not even close to being even, Steven. And maybe our finances are just totally different. That's fine. That's fine. There's other ways that you can honestly be reciprocal. Maybe there's other plans that can be made so the person knows that there really is a future. But when not even those things are said or those things are in motion, then it's like, what are you doing? You're just a charity case then? And it's okay for me to give you hours of my time about your situation and you haven't even asked if I'm okay? You understand? I don't expect, I don't think you should expect I don't think you need to be given in the same way that you give, because many times a person can't. They don't know how or they don't have the means. That's fine. But there's other ways to show that you are invested in a situation as someone else is, even if you can't reciprocate in the same way. Ethics is not measured by whether something was given, sorry. It is measured by whether risk and care are shared. Yeah, if you're taking all the risk, all the care is being given from you to them, it's a clear picture what's happening. There is also a reason why the narrative often stays focused on the other person's hardship. Financial stress, exhaustion, family, trauma, past relationships. These realities are real. They really are real. I doubt that they're lying to you. They could probably show you proof. But they are not neutral in how they are deployed. When hardship is consistently used to deflect accountability, it becomes a shield. And when someone's pain is always in the foreground while yours is consistently in the background, the relationship is no longer mutual. Now, I'm not going to call them a parasite. That would be mean, right? But the bottom line is that's not compassion. That is a hierarchy. And your hierarchy of needs are non-existent at the present time. One of the hardest things for people to accept is that someone can be genuinely struggling and still behave unethically. Those two things are not opposites. They are often coexisting. Pain does not automatically produce empathy. Sometimes it produces entitlement. Sometimes it produces tunnel vision. Sometimes it produces a belief that survival justifies extraction. This is where people confuse understanding with absolution. I can absolve you of everything you're doing to me because I know you're in pain. No. If I'm in pain and I know what it feels like, how is it that I'm willing to give you pain while I'm feeling pain? Wouldn't I realize that this pain is horrible and I don't want you to bear the same or its likeness? Wouldn't I want to cover you? I know that people always say hurt people, but that's not necessarily true. Maybe they do inadvertently, but not when they have the understanding, the information. It's like abuse. People say that people who are abused, as children or whatever it is, grow up to be abusers. That's not true. It happens, but it's not the percentages is not even close to as high as people try to assume. If you are loving, caring, balanced, and understanding what happened to you, you do not want to pass that pain on to anyone. Now, if you're sick, probably, most likely there. But if you have realized what's happened to you and you are a functioning adult, you don't want someone else around you who you say you care about to also go through those types of pain. If anything, you're trying to shield people from it and take it on yourself like a superhero. For real. You can understand why someone behaves the way they do and still judge the behaviors as wrong. Those two positions are not in conflict. In fact, holding them together is a sign of moral maturity. By the time this dynamic ends, many people are left with a specific kind of anger that they don't know how to place. It's not rage, it's not bitterness. It's a quiet outrage at having been treated as an expendable, useless. I won't even end that. But while acting with sincerity, it's the sense that something was taken that can't be returned. Time, energy, trust, and that no one is acknowledging the cost. The anger is not toxic. It is informational, though. It is your moral sense reasserting itself after a period of suspension and suppression. The goal is not to live in that anger at all. The goal is to listen to what it is telling you. It is telling you that kindness without boundaries become permission. Do it to me. What did Jim Carrey say in Liar Liar? Hit me again. I can put some more stank on it. It is telling you that understanding without limits becomes self-betrayal. It is telling you that not everyone who struggles is safe to love closely. Remember the story? I can't remember the story. You probably have to Google it. But I remember it was like, what was it? Maybe an ant or something. An ant was coming across and he saw a scorpion, and the scorpion said, "Hey, I need help. Can you help me get to the other side of the river?" The ant says something like, "No, if I put you on my boat, you'll probably just sting me and kill me." And he's like, "No, man, I promise I won't." He says, "Well, you're a scorpion." He said, "Yeah, but I won't." He says, "Okay, jump on." He paddles his way across the stream. And just as they're about 3/4 of the way over, and the scorpion realizes that he could probably jump across and make it on his own, he stings him. The ant says, "Why?" Scorpion said, "You knew who I was before you let me on the boat. You know what it was. You knew my story. You knew my tendencies. Listen, one of the most painful parts of this experience is not the ending itself, really, because I'm sure there is some relief in there somewhere, of some kind. You know what I mean. But it is the silence that follows, the absence of explanation, the lack of acknowledgement, the way the person who mattered so much to you seems to move on as if nothing meaningful happened. People wait for closure because they believe it will restore order. I know you just wish that at very least they would say sorry, but you probably didn't get that. And even if you got it, you probably didn't feel it as deep as your commitment. They believe that if the other person could just say the right sentence and admit the harm that they caused, explain themselves honestly, or show some sign of remorse, then the confusion would settle and the pain would have somewhere to go other than in their chest. That belief makes sense. It is also almost always wrong. Closure does not come from the person who benefited from ambiguity, because acknowledging the truth would require them to confront something they have spent their entire dynamic avoiding, responsibility. To give you closure, they would have to do several things at once. They would have to admit that they knew what they were doing and knew how attached you were. They would have to admit that they continued to accept care while knowing they could not or would not reciprocate in any meaningful way that you needed or wanted them to. They would have to admit that your suffering was visible and still not decisive enough to change their behavior. You might have heard it. You might have turned a blind eye. It might have stung when you heard it way back as you go back into the recesses of your mind when they said, "Should I feel sorry for you?" And you probably thought in your heart, "Is that even a question?" Yes. That is a heavy mirror to look into. Do you think they're going to do it? Many can't. Most can't. After a whole dynamic like that, it takes a lot. That person would have to be at the lowest end, last rung of the ladder. They'd have to be in that sunken, vulnerable place. For many people, especially those who organize their identity around being the wounded one, the survivor, the overwhelmed one, or the victim of circumstances, or the broken one, that level of self-confrontation is basically intolerable. It threatens the story they need in order to live with themselves. I mean, sometimes people will say I'm no good or I'm a bad person, or people tell me all the time, but how many people truly envision themselves as the villain in their story? Like for real, for real. Not just the fact that they know they've done bad things, but how many actually look at themselves as the actual villain? So instead of closure, you get disappearance, ghost. You get politeness. You get distance, or a version of events that minimizes what actually happened, which probably really ticks you off. Or a reframing where you are described as intense, needy, misreading things, not because that is true, and maybe in some ways it is, slightly, maybe, but because it is easier than saying, I allowed someone to hurt while I took what they offered and it helped me. This is why silence after the ending is not neutral. Silence is information. Are you listening? Are you listening? Are you listening? When someone does not check on you, does not ask if you're okay, does not acknowledge the rupture, and does not attempt repair, they are telling you that your internal world was never central to their experience, and it doesn't matter that much. They are not confused. They are not just wrapped up in their own problems. They are not processing. They are finished. That realization hurts in a very specific way because it forces you to confront the fact that you were grieving something that the other person had already exited emotionally. Long before it actually ended, it was over. Even while they were still present physically or conversationally or proximately, that's not a word. You know what I mean. They were still around. People often misinterpret this lack of follow up as strength. They tell themselves that the other person, is being mature, right? Respecting boundaries or moving on healthily. Sometimes it's true in this dynamic, but it rarely is. More often, it is disengagement. More often, they found somebody new. From something that was never fully engaged in the first place. This is why reaching out for closure almost always backfires. When you ask for answers, you are asking the person who avoided accountability throughout the relationship to suddenly provide you this amazing information at the end, heartfully. When they cannot or will not, you walk away feeling invalidated all over again. The wound reopens because the structure has not changed. Another reason closure never comes from them is because they do not experience the ending the same way that you do. For you, the relationship carried meaning, investment, and future orientation. For them, utility, support, attention, validation, regulation, relief. Once that utility is gone, or you don't have it to give, maybe it's all dried up, the relationship is functionally complete. And Scorpion. Well, the Scorpion was honest. Maybe on his side of the river, if he didn't get on some type of a raft or boat or something, he would have drowned. But when he caught his bearings, he knew what was going to happen. He knew what he was going to do. Just didn't tell you because you'd stop paddling. This difference in experience creates what feels like emotional whiplash, a sting. You are still processing, still replaying, still integrating, still looking at old pictures, still playing old messages, still listening to old songs. Them? They're on their merry way elsewhere. Not because they're heartless, but because that attachment was never symmetrical. Understanding that difference is crucial because it stops you from personalizing their silence as proof that you were unimportant as a person. You were important as a function, not a whole person. And when the function ended, the connection ended with it. That is not a statement about your worth, though. It is a statement about how the bond was structured. The final reason closure does not come from them is because closure would remove the option of future access. You probably change your mind. Ambiguity keeps the door open. Accountability closes them. Yeah, if they admit it, then they can't come back in 5 months or 2 years. Even after a relationship ends, some people unconsciously preserve ambiguity in case they need to return later. Not to rebuild, though, not to rebuild, just to regulate themselves. That is why some people resurface months or years later with casual messages. Nostalgia. Nostalgia ultra. Or concern that appears out of nowhere. How are you doing? Long time no see. I thought of you because this song, right? Send you a weird TikTok or Instagram thing or whatever. It is not a sign of growth, though. It is a test of your availability. Might need to jump back on your raft. Go back. Real closure does not require their participation. In fact, waiting for it keeps you tied to the very dynamic that harmed you. You stay oriented towards their internal world instead of returning to your own. That costs you time, thought, focus. Closure comes from naming what actually happened without needing their agreement. It comes from saying this was not mutual uncertainty, it was asymmetric attachment. It comes from saying I was not asking for too much, I was asking the wrong person. It comes from saying my pain makes sense given the structure I was in. When you stop seeking validation from someone who could not offer ethical care, your nervous system begins to settle. Not all at once, not neatly, but steadily. This dynamic does not exist in a vacuum. If it did, it would be easier to name, easier to leave, and easier to explain to other people. It's the reason why you gave them just a piece of what was going on. Can't tell them the whole picture. You look like an idiot. You gave what? One of these reasons it causes so much confusion is self-doubt. And self-doubt, I should say, because it is quietly supported by the cultural environment around it. Not openly, not intentionally, but certainly structurally. We are living in a period where personal freedom is treated as the highest moral good, often without parallel discussions of responsibility. Autonomy is praised, boundaries are celebrated, self-focused is framed as growth, and that climate, and requests for clarity, reciprocity, or accountability can be miscast as pressure, insecurity, or control. That framing matters because it reverses the moral burden. Instead of asking whether someone is acting responsible toward the people who are attached to them, the focus shifts to whether the attached person is asking for too much, you know? Wanting to know where you stand becomes a character flaw of insecurity. Wanting consistency becomes a sign of weakness. Wanting to feel considered becomes evidence that you are not healed enough. This creates a culture where detachment is confused with strength. You know, let's all be stoic. People who can stay emotionally unbound while receiving attention are often admired. They are described as independent, selective, empowered, boundaries, high value. Meanwhile, people who invest deeply are quietly shamed. They are told that they should protect themselves better, love less, expect less, and need less. But relationships cannot survive on detachment alone. These people are trying to tell you foolishness. They require mutual risk. They do. They require people to be affected by one another. Another factor is the collapse of shared timelines. In previous generations, relationships were more often anchored by external structures, right? Family expectations, community visibility, children, economic interdependence. Those structures were not perfect, and many were expressive or oppressive. But they did create consequence for prolonged ambiguity. You need to know where you're going, and you needed to try and get there. Now many adults live without those anchors. That means it's like the wild, wild west out here. That means relationships can remain undefined, situationships, whatever the heck that is, indefinitely, without social cost, right? Because social morals have dropped at an all-time low. You can take emotional support from one person, sexual validation from another, financial help from a third, and still describe yourself as unattached. That fragmentation allows people to meet their needs across multiple channels without ever fully committing to anyone, even if they're married. Yeah, people will be married and their emotional continuity in life would be connected to someone else. And they have best friends at work that, wubbies and all that stuff. And people that they tell their real problems to, even though they're married to someone else. Yeah. In that environment, the person who gives deeply to one connection is at a disadvantage. Your heart's open. And if your heart's open, your chest is open, waiting for a hug. Somebody's going to rip your heart out because you let them, because you were open. They are concentrating their care, The other person is diversifying theirs. Yeah, let's diversify everything, right? This is not of, a moral failing in itself, although it is. People will say it isn't, but it certainly becomes one when the concentration is exploited by someone who knows exactly what they are receiving and exactly what they are doing. Another cultural factor is the overuse of therapeutic language without ethical grounding. And ethical grounding, where does that come from for some people? The Bible. And now you know why it says that two cannot walk unless they agree. Why it says you should not be unequally yoked with unbelievers. Because when you are, you're setting yourself up to be stung by a scorpion. Terms like trauma, triggers, healing, and self care are often used to explain behavior when that behavior generally is selfish. But nobody wants to say it that way. So they say these things, right? Okay? Trauma, triggers, healing. It's kind of like when they said global warming, right? And then they changed the story and said it's what was it? Climate change? As if climate hasn't always been changing. But that's just me. Let's leave that alone. But not to evaluate it. Explanations replace responsibility. Pain becomes a permanent exemption from consequence. Oh, I'm in pain. That's why he punched you in the face because he was in pain. It's okay. He just was acting out of his pain. When someone says, I am avoidant, or I am healing because I'm broken, or I am not ready, those statements are often treated as endpoints rather than starting points. The unspoken rule becomes if someone has a reason, they cannot be challenged, right? They can just say whatever it is. I'm a pumpkin. When someone says, I'm avoidant, indeed. But having a reason does not mean your behavior is harmless. This culture also struggles to talk honestly about exchange, reciprocity, transaction, like transactions were a bad thing, about giving and receiving, about imbalance, about the fact that relationships involve resources, time, energy, money, attention, emotional labor, physical labor, maybe. Pretending that love exists outside of exchange does not make exploitation disappear. It just makes it harder to name. You know what it reminds me of? And this is off topic. If you've ever seen the movie John Q, maybe you can just probably YouTube it. There's a part where Denzel Washington he says, I can't remember how he said it, but it was something like not 4:55, not 5:30, whatever it is. He says, something happens for me. And it was the built up anguish of working hard at his job, working hard to be a good husband, working hard in general to be moral, to be good, as they say. And it seems like it's all for naught. Reciprocity is not a bad thing. giving and getting is not a bad thing, and why society is turned in a way where just because you give, it doesn't mean you should get, or you give to get. No, people give because they love. People give because their hearts are open. They want to help others. They want to be a source of something for someone. But don't villainize them because they want something back. When someone says, I gave so much more than I received, they are often told that love should not be transactional. That response shut down a valid observation because the issue is not transactional. The issue is proportionately. Healthy relationships are not ledgers, but they are not black holes either. You're not just giving into a pit like a mother bird giving into a baby bird. Another reason this dynamic persists is because it flatters certain narratives. The idea that someone can be deeply desired without being bound, that they can be pursued without choosing, that they can remain the center of attention without taking up any responsibility. That is an intoxicating, intoxicating position to occupy. People love it, especially for someone who has felt powerless in the past. It's like, it's my turn. I'm up. I got next. Give me, give me, give me, give me, because I was abused, because I was taken advantage of. It's my turn. And when that position is challenged, the challenger is often framed as a problem. They got issues. Finally, there is silence around harm that is not dramatic, not shouting, not violence, no clear betrayal, just quiet erosion. That kind of harm does not fit neatly in the public conversation. It is too subtle to rally around and too personal to easily explain. So people carry it privately because it's embarrassing. They doubt themselves, they minimize it, they say things like, it wasn't that bad, or I should be over it by now, or it was my fault for caring too much. That silence, that silence protects that pattern. What you're doing by naming this is not being bitter or reactionary. You're restoring language to an experience that has been made unspeakable by cultural madness and confusion. Listen, leaving this kind of dynamic does not feel like victory. It does not feel clean. It does not feel empowering in the way popular culture promises for most people. It feels disorienting. Yeah. You see, it's quiet. It's anticlimactic, climactic, clim, climatic, jeez, climatic. That doesn't feel right. Almost empty, basically. That emptiness scares people because it makes them wonder if they made the wrong decision or if they gave up too soon. Maybe if I just hung on just a little bit longer. Or if they were expecting something that was never realistic. That reaction is actually normal. When you exit a relationship built on intermittent reinforcement and asymmetric attachment, your nervous system does not celebrate. It goes into withdrawal. The unpredictability that kept you alert is gone. Your body does not yet know how to reset. The absence of contact can feel heavier than the presence ever did. This is where many people go back. Yeah. Imagine. They did not go back because they suddenly believed that the relationship was healthy. They go back because it's familiar. Familiar pain feels safer than unfamiliar quiet. They go back because the bond trained them to equate intensity with meaning and calm with loss. They go back because a part of them still hopes that the other person will finally see them, finally choose them, finally understand what was lost. That hope is the last thing to be dismantled. Because what happened for them just does not add up. Until it does. And who knows what they've had to lose to get to that point. Reclaiming yourself after this kind of experience does not start with anger. It starts with reorientation. You have to slowly shift your focus away from who the other person was or was not, and toward the rules you were living by when you entered the dynamic in the first place. If you're a Christian, I would suggest you get back to reading your Bible to figure out what is what again, because you have confused yourself by getting into this dynamic in the first place. If you're unmarried, of course. If you're married, that's different. You're married. That's your conscious decision to be married to this person. So I would never tell you to leave a marriage at all. If you're still here listening, I probably should have said that a long time ago. Because I'm not here giving advice. I'm just breaking down the situation. You believe that patience was always virtuous. You believe that understanding should override discomfort. You believe that care would eventually be met with care. You believe that asking for clarity risked ruining something real. You didn't want them to walk away. Those beliefs are not foolish. They're just incomplete. What this experience teaches, painfully and permanently, is that love without boundaries becomes permission, and generosity without limits becomes exposure to being stung. Not everyone who receives your care is obligated to value it, but you are obligated to protect it. I know you just want to be able to close your eyes and say, "Catch me." It reminds me of that Simpsons episode one of the early episodes, and I think it was Ned Flanders' kids, and they were jumping on the bed, and the one kid goes, "Catch me, Lord, catch me," and he smashed into his brother. Yeah, people get in the way. Reclaiming yourself means rewriting your internal rules. It means learning that clarity is not pressure. No, clarity, you wanting to see where you're going, is not pressure. It's safety. It means learning that consistency matters more than intensity. That adrenaline hit, that adrenaline rush. It means learning that someone's hardship does not entitle them to sacrifice you. It means learning that you can leave without proving that you are right. It means in this dynamic, you're most likely not going to get or receive a final closure statement, at least not a heartfelt one, or at least one that's not going to, chances are if you get one, it won't satisfy you anyway. One of the most important shifts happens when you stop asking, why did this happen? Or why did they do this to me? And start asking, why did I tolerate this? And start saying, I will never tolerate this in this way again. That question is not self-blame. It is self-recovery. People who fully integrate their experiences do not become colder. They become more precise. They do not love less. They love with structure. They do not stop giving. They give where there is some sort of reciprocity, not morsels, not breadcrumbs. That's not the same thing. They do not stop empathizing with others. You're a loving person. Why would you? Who wants to live without love and empathy? Not me. But they stop being a beating stick. They stop being a carpet to be walked on. They stop being that jacket thrown in the puddle and discarded. They stop being expendable, replaceable. They stop absorbing pain that is not theirs to carry in the first place. When they're realizing that they're the only ones carrying pain and the other, nah. They also stop mistaking access for intimacy. It's not the same thing. Some people give access to a lot of people, but not intimacy. Real intimacy. Can't. If someone wants your time, your body, your money, your emotional labor, but resists to define the relationship, integrating you into their life, meeting the fam, meeting their kids or meeting their mom, meeting their dad, coming to their house, meeting their friends, come on. Protect your heart. Resistance is the answer. You do not need to extract clarity from someone who avoids it. Avoidance is clarity. Yeah. It's like a game of 5-card Monte, or 3-card Monte, I should say. Another quiet but powerful change, or shift as they like to say, happens around dignity. People realize that dignity is not something bestowed by being chosen. It is something maintained by leaving situations that require self-abandonment. You do not earn dignity by enduring disrespect. You preserve it by recognizing when endurance has become erosion. This is also where people stop needing the other person to understand what they did wrong. Understanding becomes optional once you understand yourself. The urge to be seen by them fades when you begin to see yourself clearly. That does not mean you forget. It means the memory loses the grip on you. Over time, the narrative changes. You no longer say, I lost someone. You say, I learned how easily goodness can be misused. My goodness is mistaken for weakness by you. When it's unguarded, you no longer ask, what was wrong with me? You ask, why did I stay loyal to something that requires my silence and for me to take everything on the chin by myself? For me to try to deflect bullets like Superman. You're not Superman. Those bullets are going to pierce you. You're not Superman. You're not 50 Cent. The most important outcome of this process is not better dating choices. It is restored self-trust and respect. You learn to listen to discomfort earlier. You learn to believe patterns instead of promises. You learn that mutual effort feels calm and it's not confusing at all. And when you enter someone, or when you, when you encounter someone new, you notice something immediately. There is no need to chase, no need to guess, no need to wait in ambiguity. Care shows up alongside responsibility, or it does not show up at all. That is the difference. Listen, this is not an argument against love, vulnerability, or patience. You need those things, and you have them, and you give those things. It is an argument against unreciprocated devotion disguised as maturity. It is a refusal to pretend that all pain is noble or that all suffering is growth. Some experiences are lessons. They're not virtues. It's not the same in every situation, right? Listen, if you're listening to this and still in the middle of something that feels familiar, that most important thing to know is this. If a relationship requires you to minimize yourself in order to keep it, you're not married. It is already costing you too much. If you're married, it's a different situation. You can read what that says in the Bible. You do not need more time. You need more truth. Jesus says that he is truth. You got to read that word. I am the way, the truth, the life. I think it says no one comes to the Father but by me. That's what Jesus said. You can, don't quote me on that because I don't have a Bible in front of me or scriptures on here. I'm just coming off of what I know. But I think I've quoted that wrong. So just check it out. I'm the way, the truth, the life. Anyway, check it out. I could sit here and find it properly for you, but I want you to do your own research. Listen, and if you've already left and you're wondering why it still hurts, understand this. You are not missing that person. You are releasing a version of yourself that believed care would be enough. That belief deserved respect. And you deserve respect from those you would be in a relationship with. And you just needed a safer place to be with a safer person. All right, guys. Thus far, today, this is the longest episode of You're Probably Right. I hope you learned something. It's not an easy lesson. I hope you don't have to listen to this again, but you might. And if you fell asleep through most of it, I'd say go back to the last part that you remember. Remember, I'm here for you when you're not the only one going through this. You're not the only one who's gone through this. The hope is that you don't go through it again. Keep loving. Keep caring. Be mindful of who you open up your heart to. Until next time, it's MCM signing off. Take care. Oh, man. That was a long one.
Hey, come check out You Probably Right podcast. Society is getting more unpredictable every day, but at the same time, predictable in its unpredictability. Say that 4 times real fast. Come with me as I attempt to find clarity in all the fog while staying way outside the box and kicking the box way down the road with my size 12 ducks. I use the Bible, experience, education, fortune, misfortune, life's lessons, life's mistakes to sort through all the mess. I talk about news, God, God, self-help, sports, sickness, health, music, parenting, love, humbleness, hurt, pain, joy, and all the things that might make you say, I never thought of it that way. Hopefully, anyway. Also, I take a stab at answering tough and not so tough questions, and all the while understand that, listen, sometimes you end up in the hot seat and there's no thermostat. Well, that's how it is here. And because there's no topic, very few topics off the table, Torontonians will understand that Doug Ford reference there. Hopefully the podcast will be helpful and uplifting. And hey, maybe you'll find your own private Idaho here somewhere. Hope to see you soon.
I'm still wide awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the space you take. One day you're here, next day you're gone, and I'm just trying to understand where we went wrong. You only love me in the middle of the night. Then you fade away with the morning light. I need to know, is this for real? Tell me how you truly feel. Oh, yeah. I give my all, you give me half your heart. You say the words, but we just stay so far apart. These mixed signals are tearing me down, lost in the silence when you're not around. Tell me how you feel. How you really feel. Is any of this real? Just tell me, yeah. Tell me, baby. Oh. You only love me in the middle of the night. In the night. Then you fade away with the morning light. Morning light. I need to know, is this for real? Tell me how you truly feel.